The story begins as a charming woman tours a luxury home, praising the antique furniture to an impressed client. She points out the lighting during the golden hour and draws his attention to the high ceilings. Using the alias Emma Woodhouse to intrigue him, she suggests the house creates a private paradise. She claims the low price requires an immediate decision, pushing the man to agree to the lease. After promising to meet him later that night, she secures the deal with a flirtatious offer of wine. That evening, the man returns to the property, but a confused stranger answers the door instead. When he asks for Emma, the owner denies knowing her. The tenant calls her number only to find it disconnected, finally realizing he has been scammed out of his money. Meanwhile, her partner recites literature at a loud nightclub, where she admires the flashing neon lights above them. She jokingly tries to sell him the venue, asking for a deposit to play out their con game. Later, they lounge by a private swimming pool, where she complains that their crimes feel too easy. She playfully shrieks as they mess around in the water, eventually telling him that she loves him. She refuses to say the words back to her, claiming emotional vulnerability is only for their victims. Suddenly, a siren wails in the distance, drawing their attention to a suspicious email on their laptop. The message appears to come from a police station, causing them to fear their operation is compromised. While she insists someone is merely fishing for them, she frantically brings up a past disaster in Baltimore. Smith dismisses the threat of jail while planning their escape, but Paloma downplays the danger of their previous Baltimore scam. She insists there were absolutely no real consequences for them. Smith ignores her to cautiously reply via a secure VPN, and she reminds her that he saved her from boredom. Paloma argues that their current situation is becoming incredibly tedious, so Smith proposes a competitive game to reignite the thrill. They agree that the winner will decide their next destination. Paloma accepts the challenge immediately, eager to prove herself. She considers using a literary alias for the upcoming mission. Smith assigns her a cottage in Woodstock with terrible reviews. She notes the location is famously infested with bedbugs. Paloma laughs at a ring inscription he recently acquired. She challenges her to secure a high-end brownstone in Brooklyn. Smith accepts the difficult task despite the high cost. They discover the owner is a famous neurosurgeon named Robert. Paloma reads aloud about her pioneering work in cranial medicine. Meanwhile, Dr. Kezian performs a delicate brain surgery at the hospital. He skillfully navigates the procedure while his team monitors vitals. After the operation, a colleague praises his miraculous success. However, Robert remains unsatisfied with merely extending a patient's life. He complains about bureaucratic red tape blocking his experimental research. His friend suggests moving his trials to India to avoid regulations. Later, the colleague asks why he still rents out his home. Robert admits he cannot bring himself to sell the property yet. Finally, he returns home to greet his new tenant. Paloma tours the stately home while posing as a potential tenant, impressing Dr. Kezian enough that he jokes about hiring her. She playfully suggests she might have bricked up the servants herself, which amuses Robert before he solemnly reflects on his late wife, describing her as a brilliant neuroscientist who died far too young. Paloma feigns a deep spiritual connection to the property's energy and secures the rental agreement just before crying out in pain. She claims her ring was mangled in the garbage disposal, prompting the surgeon to gently repair the jewelry with his steady hands. He reveals that he currently lives at his late in-law's home and hands over the Wi-Fi passwords and alarm codes without hesitation. After a lingering hug seals his trust, he finally departs, leaving Paloma to immediately drop her facade and call Smith. She vividly describes her plan to scam multiple renters simultaneously, while confirming she has already secured full access to the property. Smith critiques her wig choice over the phone line, but she ignores him to list her successful preparations. She notes the cameras are disabled before reciting the alarm code, and while exploring the study she reads a plaque about ethics, before she cynically mocks the dead woman's moral stance on biotechnology. She dismisses Smith's suggestion to abort the dangerous game, declaring she only makes wagers she is certain to win. Paloma adopts a convincing Irish persona to show the mansion's interior, assuring her client that the owners are away in Florida. She then comforts a nervous Robert regarding his upcoming procedure, but her focus shifts when Smith calls to check on the con. After promising to bring Robert pizza once he recovers, she tells Smith she intends to target a corporate high-rise next. Later that night, she pours a drink for a new mark named Tad, describing the home as a private paradise to lower his defenses. However, Tad ignores the business discussion and moves in closer, insisting that her professional demeanor is actually a signal for intimacy. When she rejects him, he attacks, sparking a violent struggle. Tad pins her to the floor while she screams and fights for release, and the brawl continues until a heavy thud silences the room. Meanwhile, Detective Warwicker returns to the precinct, determined to find the woman who got him shot. Diane identifies a pattern of literary aliases used for the rental scams. Realizing the criminal mocked them by replying to a bait email, they decide to filter recent listings for famous fictional names to track her, declaring that Warwicker and Crace are officially back on the case. Back at the mansion, Robert breathes heavily while trying to reschedule work calls, but he is forced to lie down to treat a ripped suture. Paloma wakes up in a private medical facility, confused and weak, where Robert explains he treated her massive blood loss himself. And when she begs for her phone to make a call, and he mocks her alias, seeing through the literary reference, he accuses her of wasting intelligence on criminal schemes, urging her to help the world instead of harming people. And before she can react, he prepares a syringe with calm precision, warning her to stay still as he administers the injection. As she loses consciousness again under his questionable care, Smith leaves a voicemail boasting about selling the mansion, unaware that his partner has completely vanished from the grid. Later, Detective Warwicker arrives at Robert's doorstep investigating a disappearance, claiming the missing man's phone pinged near this location. Robert calmly denies seeing anyone but mentions a blocked hydrant, telling the officer he had a mysterious Mercedes towed away, and the detective accepts the lie and hands over a card. Paloma eventually wakes up in a dark industrial basement, and she recoils when Robert enters to offer her painkillers. And discovering a heavy chain is now locked around her neck, she screams in panic, demanding to know what is happening. And while he calmly explains that his lab requires strict containment, he ignores her desperate pleas to call the police instead, and when he walks away, she is left trapped. And he returns later to dismantle her psychological defenses with ease, noting that he analyzed her DNA while she slept. He confirms her true identity as Paloma Joya beyond doubt. Ellen declares his intention to use her to prove a point, in leaving her questioning his sinister plans for saving the world. And meanwhile, Smith waits at a bar, oblivious to her capture, until a woman approaches and jokingly claims his seat. And she teases him about losing his touch with women. And after a brief, flirtatious exchange about his hesitation, and she invites him to leave with her immediately, Paloma bangs on her cell door to demand a bathroom break. But she refuses to use the bucket provided by the silent guard. She decides to name the stoic figure Lenny to pass the time, and she nervously jokes about her medical conditions to break the silence. She recounts her family's tragic death to provoke a reaction, but the man ignores her attempts at conversation completely. Suddenly, the guard roars like a wild animal, terrifying her, until Robert enters to calm the man with a strange clicking sound. He reveals that Lenny is actually a brain-damaged nurse he is treating. Meanwhile, Detective Crace studies the list of fake identities Paloma utilized, and she realizes that every alias corresponds to a character from literature. Crace narrows the search to books published by Penguin Classics. Elsewhere, Smith sits in a car listening to a woman's sob story, and he agrees to rescue her friend Molly from an abusive partner. He marches up to Robert's front door and begins pounding on it, but a voice from inside yells that he has the wrong address. The surgeon insists that no one named Molly lives there, so Smith ignores the denial and forces his way inside to attack. Robert's scream pierces the air as the confrontation turns physical, while the sounds of their violent struggle echo down to the basement. Paloma guesses the keypad code is Robert's dead wife's birthday, and the heavy mechanism finally clicks open after several attempts. She creeps through the dark hallway searching for an exit, but she is immediately cornered by a large, barking dog. She freezes when she sees her friend stumbling toward her, just as a severely injured Smith collapses on the floor nearby. Robert struggles with his sanity, hearing his late wife Rebecca's voice, urging him to seize control and complete their controversial work. She insists he must proceed for the sake of their shared vision, and as the hallucinations intensify, Robert steels himself for the procedure. Meanwhile, Paloma regains consciousness in the basement lab, calling out for Smith. She watches in horror as Robert dictates his surgical notes for the transplant, and she realizes with shock that he has kept Tad alive. Desperate to stall him, she begs Robert to find another way, arguing that he cannot use living tissue for his twisted experiments. Robert coldly dismisses her moral outrage, determined to prove his genius, while elsewhere, Detective Warwicker connects Paloma's alias to Robert's property. Back in the lab, Robert begins the invasive surgery on Paloma's skull, causing her to gasp in pain as he describes the extraction process. As the drill whirs, Paloma notices Smith lying nearby, barely clinging to life, and she weeps as Robert exposes her brain tissue to the air. Smith urges her to stay focused on him during the trauma, whispering a final declaration of love before his heart monitor flatlines. Despite her devastation, Paloma tries to manipulate Robert's grief to stop him, recounting how she also could not let go of her lost family. Robert ignores her, applying bioadhesive to fuse the donor tissue, while she insists that his actions are driven by sorrow, not science. Finally, the surgeon turns his attention to the unconscious test subject, and he commands Tad to raise his right arm, shouting the order repeatedly in a desperate bid for success. In the basement lab, Robert checks on his experiment, but when the patient awakens, he reacts with sudden, violent aggression. The man struggles to speak, uttering a specific phrase about Baltimore, which instantly reveals to Paloma that Smith's consciousness has survived. Overwhelmed with relief, she declares her love for him, and the man in the strange body reciprocates her deep affection. However, Robert realizes the transfer has retained the original personality, so he ruthlessly subdues the patient while Paloma screams in protest. She vows to kill the doctor for his monstrous actions, but a sudden notification on his phone interrupts the chaos. He ignores her threats and orders his assistant to prepare her. Moments later, detectives Crace and Warwicker arrive at Robert's front door. They question him about his security cameras, which are conveniently disabled. Warwicker asks for footage, but Robert deflects with a casual excuse. Changing tactics, they present a rental listing for his home and inquire about the noticeable limp he tries to hide. Robert claims it is an old injury, maintaining his composure. Warwicker offers a specialist, but the doctor politely declines the help. The detective then reflects on how people try on different personalities. He describes a dynamic where one cooks and the other talks. The detectives then ask about a woman named Molly Bloom, causing Robert to admit he had a guest, but with a different name. Warwicker presses harder, analyzing Robert's lack of emotional display during crises. He suggests Robert is the type people rely on when trouble strikes. He suggests another literary alias, Emma Woodhouse, testing the doctor's reaction. Robert corrects them with the name Fleur Foreman, trying to appear helpful. Warwicker compares the suspects to a brother and sister duo. They finally ask about the missing man, Tad Terabant, but Robert denies ever meeting him, mocking their suspicion of his rental habits. Once the police depart, Robert realizes the names were literary traps. Meanwhile, Paloma tries to manipulate her guard Lenny. She pleads with him to help her escape this nightmare. However, her desperate attempts to sway his loyalty seem to fail. Alone in the house, Robert begins to hallucinate his wife's voice. The haunting sound drives him to a point of screaming frustration. Outside, the detectives call for backup, suspecting foul play inside. Warwicker discusses the encounter, convinced the doctor is hiding something. He notes that a painting was moved and carpet tape was visible. Inside, Robert realizes he mixed up the fake names he gave. Realizing the aliases are fictional characters, the detectives start the car. Paloma stops when her rescuer collapses and whispers her name, revealing that Smith's consciousness is trapped inside the body. He offers a final apology before Robert shoots him dead, and the scientist collects a screaming Paloma to finish his work. Later that night, Robert plays home movies of his wife, setting a grotesque mood for the upcoming surgery. He plans to overwrite Paloma's mind with Rebecca's memories, using visual stimulation to prepare the donor brain for transfer. Meanwhile, Detective Crace spots an inconsistency in the surveillance footage, noting that the weather on the tape does not match reality. Certain that Robert is manipulating the evidence, she urges her partner to help her find the truth. Back in the basement, Paloma wakes up completely immobilized, and she watches in horror as Robert wheels out a hospital bed. He introduces the comatose patient as his wife, Rebecca, revealing that he has kept her body alive for years. Because Paloma is a perfect genetic match, she has been chosen as the new host for Rebecca's mind. Paloma spits insults at him, predicting the experiment will fail, but Robert ignores her logic and picks up a surgical drill. As the device whirs to life, he begins the lethal procedure, drowning out her screams with the sound of machinery. In a flashback, Robert brings a colleague to his secret facility, insisting that they wear scrubs to view his creation. He reminds his guest of their shared dream to change the world, but the visitor is appalled by the moral cost of his methods. Robert refuses to apologize for his actions, insisting that sacrificing one person is necessary to save the future. The story concludes as Robert justifies his grim experiments to Bradshaw, acclaiming his medical skill makes him a god. And the colleague attempts to flee the basement laboratory, but he fails to call for help in time. Robert refuses to listen to his friend's desperate pleas, and he murders the man to protect his secrets. Meanwhile, Warwicker links gunshots to the surgeon's address, and he obtains a warrant to raid the house. Paloma screams as Robert forces her into submission. Just as police units arrive with sirens wailing, and they surround the building and prepare to breach, and officers kick down the door to secure the perimeter, and the tactical team clears the hallways, room by room, while Crace checks the rear exit for any escapees. They follow the sound of classical music downstairs. where the team discovers a morgue filled with dead bodies. And Grace realizes that Robert has already fled the scene, but a recording reveals he owns a secret second home. Robert watches anxiously as the surgery concludes at this hideout. And the patient begins to wake up in the new body. And he welcomes his wife back from the dead, and yet she presses him for details about the victim. And he claims the girl was alone and unloved. And then they walk outside into the fresh air together, as she pulls him into a tight, affectionate embrace. But Robert notices a specific tattoo on her shoulder, and he struggles to breathe as she whispers her thanks